We have a quorum. Just advise everyone in the public gallery as they come in that they can use mobile devices through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery rules for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. 3G and 4G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. Today's business, we will be receiving a ministerial briefing on the MOT vehicle testing services update. We have a briefing then from Translink, and then we have subordinate legislation. We've received apologies from Roy Beggs. I have no chairperson's business. Moving then to draft minutes at page 6, the draft minutes of the meeting of 26th of February. Our members agree that they are an accurate reflection of that meeting.
Agreed.
Okay. Moving then to matters arising, page 11. This is from the meeting of the 26th of February. Do members have any issues or concerns from last week's meeting?
No.
And just advise that when the committee does write to the department or other organisations, they're given 10 working days to respond. So just that will run into approximately 2 weeks really of meetings, but just so people are aware of that, so that you're not seeking a response by the next meeting. Moving then to correspondence, item 5. Just draw your attention to correspondence at page 15. Sorry, your correspondence is at page 15, so just draw your attention to page 42, which is correspondence from the Friends of Knockeye Bay, and that's regarding concerns about departmental planning decisions. Just, if you're content, maybe to note, this has also been sent to the Department for Communities. Are you agreed that we then forward this on to our own department, or Department for Infrastructure, just for comment?
Great.
Great.
Members, any other comments in relation to that? Other items of correspondence, do members have any issues they wish to discuss or intent to note with the advice? Okay, thank you very much. Tabled item page 3, there's a departmental response, and that's to the issues which came out of the meeting of the 12th of February.
What page is that?
That's page 3 of your tabled items.
Oh, table.
Okay.
Members, any concerns or issues?
No.
We can return to it again.
Okay, if there's anything.
Okay, so we're agreed. Then we'll move on to item 6, which is the
Sorry, do I have to note that I'm a member of the Commission? The Commission budget table paper?
You wish to?
Well,
We've noted that. That's been declared. Okay, moving on then to item 6, which is a ministerial briefing, which is on the MOT vehicle testing service update. Hansard will be recording this session. The Minister's indicated that she's approximately 30 minutes. So, welcome Minister Nichola Mallon and Judy Thompson, Deputy Secretary of Planning, to the committee. You're both very welcome. Thank you. If members are content and the Minister's in agreement that we have been issued with a very comprehensive statement last Thursday, and thank the Minister for that and her briefing on that. And if we're content, we'll just go straight to questions. Obviously, welcome the statement, and obviously the fact that this is moving towards a solution and bringing the saga to a conclusion. There still is really an issue in relation to drivers who have temporary exemption certificates, and it is likely that some of those certificates will expire before lifts are in place. What plans do you have in relation to those motorists?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to be here. Yes, even though the 52 lifts have been purchased under an accelerated programme, which means that from April they will be installed with all new lifts fully installed by mid-July, it will have a continued impact on motorists. What I have asked officials to do is to provide me with a detailed work programme in terms of installation and location of lifts and how many motorists will continue to be affected. It is very likely that I will have to extend the TEC period further for those who who have already been issued with one. But what I have asked officials to do is to document all of that out and timeline it for me, because what I'm very conscious of is the need to be very clear in the communication with the public and not to add to any further confusion. Once I have that detailed work programme, then I will be making an announcement about the further extension of TECs in terms of time frame, but also for the group of motorists that will be affected.
There's clearly a maximum period that you can extend TECs for.
We could extend them for a further 2 months, which would give a TEC period of 6 months. I have requested DSO legal advice as well about if it was necessary to give a further extension, and I'm looking at issues around consultation that might be required. So what I'm continuing to do, Chair, is to make sure that I am going in detail through all of the options so that whatever we need to do, we are fully prepared for, and that I can communicate that to the public at the earliest opportunities.
Okay, and given the timescale for delivery and installation, as you say, there will be further backlog will accrue during that period of time. At this stage, have you any consideration as to how long it will take for the backlog to be addressed and for normal service to resume?
I don't have definitive figures. As part of the detailed work programme going forward, that's what I've asked officials to provide me with. What we're weighing up is, as the lists are being installed, do we then just start to call people whose tests are due at that time, which would almost ring-fence the people who have already been provided with TECs, so that we're just furthering the continuation of that and we're not affecting a new group of motorists. That would be my preferred option in terms of trying to minimise disruption. So I'm asking officials to get me all of that information. My objective all along here has been ensuring the safety of DVA staff and customers and doing what I can to minimise the disruption to staff, get our MOT centres fully and safely operable as quickly as possible. That will still determine my approach going forward.
Okay. In the statement, it mentions on a couple of occasions protracted legal action. On what basis were you considering that?
In terms of exploring all of the options, so I explored repairing of the lifts, replacement, new lifts. I did examine the legal option. I looked at sourcing the lifts from an alternative supplier. In respect of the legal advice, I took advice from procurement, expert procurement, and also DSO, and I took QC advice. All of that advice, in addition to the audit advice, even though I don't have the completed report, was that the most timely and cost-effective option was to purchase the equipment from MAHA under the existing contract. The legal advice to me advised that yes, you could pursue a legal option, though that would be a very protracted and costly process with no guarantee of a resolution for the public. If I boil all of this down in terms of the information and the advice that I've received to date, it seems to me that this situation arose because of two things: an inadequate inspection regime and overuse of machinery. Of all of the information and advice that I have received, it does not appear that there is a difficulty, and I certainly have been advised that there was no difficulty in procuring the equipment from MAHA. It is a world-leading supplier. If we look at the situation in the south, and they are now purchasing the equipment off MAHA where there was cracks, so that's why I've put in a series of additional measures in terms of a new and improved maintenance and regime contract between MAHA and DVA, a much more robust inspection and maintenance regime, and also an additional layer of independent assessment that will be carried out regularly on the machinery for an extra level of protection. And I've also instructed DVA to put in place a new and improved equipment recycle plan or replacement plan. For me, those four measures are very important in terms of addressing some of the reason why we have got here. I can't preclude all of that because, as you understand, I'm still awaiting the final audit report, which is going to help me to understand how this situation arose, who knew what, when, and what action was taken or wasn't.
What will that actually mean with regards to scheduling and frequency of inspection compared to what was in place currently?
Well, it was actually not the frequency. I'm of the view it wasn't the frequency that was the difficulty, because we were having every 8 weeks inspection, and then a 6-month third inspection. I think for me that the inspection regime was inadequate. What I've said going forward is that there needs to be a much more robust inspection regime with a checklist, and there has to be a much more improved reporting. That's why I've focused my efforts in terms of bringing forward new measures to try to strengthen all of that. So the frequency will likely remain the same, but it will be a much more robust and extensive inspection regime going forward.
And with regards to the replacement of and the regular replacement of lifts, how often is that anticipated to take place? And what impact will then that have, obviously, on DVA budget and planning going forward?
Well, the frequency of the recycling and the replacement of machinery, I will leave to experts. I know it's an area that the audit report is going to look at. The money that was taken to purchase the 52 lifts, the 1.8 million has been taken from reserves. There is money set aside within reserves for the replacement of machinery. So I'm very clear that that needs to be expert-led, and we have to be in a situation where we never see a reoccurrence of what we've experienced. I understand that from the engineering report that I was provided with, that we are looking at a lift life cycle of perhaps 22,000 lifts, but that can be much more if you have professional assessment and maintenance. These machines were doing much more lifting than that over their lifespan, so I want to see an equipment replacement programme that is based on expert advice, and that we're getting the timely planning. So the disruption should be minimal, because we should be planning ahead for the replacement of machinery. Should be in a cycle that causes minimum disruption to staff and customers going forward.
And the long-term impact then on DVA budget?
Yeah, in terms of the budget, we have some money set aside, £11 million is set aside for equipment purchases. And as Minister described, that we will be working with the experts within CPD and with MAHA themselves around all the various aspects of things that have been identified about what the inspection regime should do in the future and how that can be improved in the future. And then also, well, what does that mean in terms of the replacement cycle or whatever? So that work is ongoing at this point, using that expertise and that advice. They do have £11 million set aside to purchase equipment, and there's also, I guess, how that falls through and what that will mean is all part of that agenda. But they have £11 million. We're using 1.8 million of that, so there's still a substantial set of reserves there looking forward. How long these lifts last and where they are getting, I guess, worn out. There's also been a change to the lift itself, so that around the area where the issue actually arose, there's additional layers have been put in place in the new models of the lift, so that'll all have to be taken into account as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hilditch?
Thanks, Chair, and I think the Chair has asked quite a comprehensive range of questions here, so you've sort of touched on mine, but thanks very much and very welcome this morning. And I have to say, I think that yourself and the department have dealt well with the situation to date. It's a moving situation over a period of time, and it is what it is, and I think we're probably flogging a horse here at some period. Certainly the issues that I had raised previously in relation to communication and safety and staff and all have been well taken care of, and I think you're on top of the ball there, okay. The area of scrutiny this committee should probably look at is probably the outcome of how it started at the end of the day, and what action is being taken on that front, and you've partly answered that. I take it's probably down to human error as far as the inspections goes, or potentially no inspections carried out at the relevant time at all, or but where do you see the problem starting out from, and how can that make sure that this doesn't happen again?
It's difficult for me to outline categorically at this stage because I haven't had sight of the audit report. I did before I made the decision to purchase the lift. I had contact with the lead auditor because I wanted reassurance that from an auditor perspective, given their investigation into this situation, that they had no concerns about me purchasing the equipment from MAHA, which they didn't. So I'm awaiting that report. I understand that it's being finalised and it should be with me very quickly. And I've already said, I'm on the record as saying that all of the recommendations that are outlined in both independent reviews I will be implementing. And I've also given assurance that just as I've put the engineering report on my departmental website, I will also be doing the same with the audit report, because I think that openness and transparency is important. But as I said, from the information that I've gathered from the engineering advice, the procurement advice, the auditing advice and the legal advice, it does seem to me that there is an issue about we should have had much more robust inspection regimes and we should have had a better equipment replacement programme in place. But I await the findings of the report and will take my learning from them. On the issue of communication, you know, I've met personally with the trade union because it is a very difficult time for staff, and they were thrust almost into this situation and it's very challenging for them, and it was a period of great uncertainty. I think we're getting better at the communication with the public, and I've been very clear that officials must be much more direct and frequent in our communication and advice to the public, especially as this situation progresses to full resolution. But I would ask for assistance from the committee, and I thank you for your support to date. I think there is some confusion that some people think that they need to get a call from DVA to advise them that their MOT appointment has been cancelled. That is not the case. There is an automatic cancellation of your appointment, and you will be automatically issued with the TEC. It would be helpful and really useful if collectively we could try to get that message out there, because from my understanding and my engagement with the public, that does seem to be an area where some people still aren't very clear.
Some confusion in that area still.
Yeah, and they're awaiting a call from DVA. So the message is the same as it has been to DVA customers. If your MOT is due, please phone up and make your appointment. Your appointment will, because we'll be making an announcement when things are resolved. At this stage, they're not, so your appointment will be automatically cancelled. You don't need to contact DVA, they don't need to contact you, and you will be automatically issued with a temporary exemption certificate. That will allow you to tax your vehicle and keep it on the road. If your vehicle is 4-year-old, or you're a car dealer or a taxi driver, there is the priority number, the telephone number. Please do phone that, and we will get you a priority appointment. All 15 of our MOT centres are operable. We have extended hours, working on Sundays. They're not fully operable, obviously, but we are working our way through the priority vehicles. So any help that the committee members could give me in encouraging that message to get out there would be really helpful.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you,
Thank
Minister.
you.
Okay, thank you. Miss Anderson?
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for your statement. And it's my first opportunity to congratulate you on your position.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you in relation to potential cars being damaged that are having to use the HGV lanes for MOT testing. I am told that they're not suitable for some cars, and I'm just wondering if that's something that's being looked at. The legal guidance surrounding the copying of the 2 years testing regime for cars between 4 and 10-year-old that takes place in the south of Ireland. If you have looked at that, I think as a committee we look forward, like yourself, to scrutinise the audit and investigation and the report that comes through, and I'm sure this committee will pursue that with the rigour that would be expected of us. I know that there were some utterances around maybe this was done by human error. I think the scale of it is quite alarming, and therefore the fact I was surprised when you outlined the regularity of the inspections, and yet this was not identified. So there's obviously some training that would need to be done by those who were involved in the inspections, because I would say that obviously, given what we're dealing with now, they didn't inspect in the way that one would be expected of them in that role. You said about the automatic and the issue of the temporary exemption certificate, and I know I have a constituent, and I'm sure he's not alone, that he was to get an MOT, it was to be in January. He tried to get an exemption. He phoned up and was told that the MOT would not take place until March. He was refused a TEC. He was told he couldn't use a car on the road. And this is a man who works and who has over 6 children. And the family home is very dependent on the system that they had in place, both getting children to school and all of that. He then receives, at the beginning of this week, notification to be told that he would be getting a TEC and he could take the car off the road. So it's the frustration and the inconvenience that has caused. That's only one case that I am bringing to your attention, and there's many, many more, and that's, I think, which has brought the public outcry. Obviously, the backlog and the frustration, but given that the department and those who were involved in issuing the TECs didn't sort of look down the track and see that the backlog wouldn't actually be cleared by, for instance, in his case, in March, and he was told he couldn't use his car, and he's very frustrated because of that case, and I don't believe that that's a single case.
Okay, I would deal with that one. I really wish you had brought that to my case straight away, because that is highly unusual, and I would like to understand the details of that. So if you could furnish me with that, because that does really seem to be a rare exception in terms, and a number of individual cases have been brought to my attention, and that's certainly an exception to all of those. If I deal with the biennial testing, I've been very clear that my job here is to resolve this problem. It's also to make sure that I put in place measures to prevent this ever reoccurring. And third, it has brought to light for me the need to improve our MOT system and network. I have already expressed to the committee that I am actively considering a range of options, one of which is biennial testing, and I am seeking DSO legal advice on that as well. And once I've considered the range,
would that be shared with the committee?
Oh, absolutely. I'm actually I'm due to be writing to the committee to set out a legislative programme. We're looking at timetable of that, and obviously I need to explore all options because this decision will hugely impact on members of the public, DVA staff and so forth. So I want to make sure that I have everything very carefully considered before I come to the committee. Obviously with respect to give the committee its absolute place. So as soon as I'm in a position to do so in terms of getting to that outcome of a much more improved MOT system and network, I will be bringing it to the committee. In terms of your first question, which was
HGV lanes?
The HGV lanes, yes.
Happy to take that. So yes, the HGV lanes have always been used or have been used for quite some time for testing cars, but the volume of the cars has obviously been higher going through those lanes than would previously have been the case. So because of that, we have obviously been looking at that quite closely, and the issue you raise is known about. However, there's only actually been 2 cases where damage has been caused to cars that we're aware of out of the significant volume that are going through those lanes. They've also been subject to further risk assessment just to confirm that they are safe to be used and that they can be handled for both staff and customers, and that has been put in place again in recent weeks, even though they had been used obviously before that as well, but just as an extra layer, an extra precaution measure, that extra step has been put in place. And there's also been further advice put on Northern Ireland Direct about, particularly if you've got low, the issue is about if there's anything low hanging off the vehicle, that potentially that can get in the way of the tracks on that HGV lane, which are slightly different to the tracks that are on a light car
So
lift.
have the centres been informed as to what cars should not go down that HGV lane and what cars should?
The risk
because
assessments.
2 cars is obviously, again, Minister, this is further frustration to people who get to the point of thinking that at least in the queue now to get this done, and then the car is done.
Yeah, the risk
It's not
assessments
against stories
have been
we
done
want to
across all centres in very recent weeks to confirm to staff how they operate those lanes and to confirm that they're being operated safely. And as I say, for a customer's side of that, more advice has gone on to the Northern Ireland Direct website as well about particularly looking for things that are low on their vehicles and potentially those needing to be removed before they go into the testing centre.
But the onus would be on those in the centre to make sure that certain cars that wasn't suitable to go down the HGV lane were not actually put into
They know how to operate those lanes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Minister and Julie, for your answers so far. My question relates around the report from White, Young, Green, which is good, and obviously there's a summary we've got here.
Yeah.
The question here, it sits in its standard version, so I'm assuming the lifts we have, or the MOT centres have, are currently a standard version, okay, which are designed for 22,000 load lifts based upon you're doing 20,000 lifts annually.
Yes.
It refers in there to fatigue.
Yes.
So my question, I suppose, a few questions is the lifts you're purchasing are different than a standard version? Are they a stronger lift? So in other words, will they do more lifts and load cycles? And is the fatigue based on a vertical fatigue or horizontal fatigue caused by the shaker plates? So therefore, the lifts we currently have are standard, and the lifts we're purchasing are non-standard or a stronger lift based on the shaker plate issue.
I'll take the first part of it. The new lifts that we're purchasing have had a design modification, so the pivot plate has been reinforced. So MAHA have taken that decision to enhance the design of it. So that should positively contribute in terms of the life cycle of the machinery. In terms of the horizontal vertical stress?
So the stress side, we have been discussing with CPD, they have structural engineers in there as well as with White, Young, Green around that. And that's back to the point, I guess, around the answer to the Chair. We will be considering all of that about how long a lift can operate within, because there's other issues about the weight of the cars. So these are standard at 4.2 or whatever tonnes, whereas an average car is only 1.5. So there's a lot of complications to it. We are operating cycles annually, which are the equivalent to that 22,000 that is for, you know, the life cycle of the lift. So you're not going to replace lifts on an annual basis. Therefore, what's important is that we get an understanding of the life cycle, and also then how long are we actually going to use them for? What does that replacement look like? And the volume part of the issue here is that there hasn't been a close enough look at what the cycles actually are, and we need to be able to pick all of that up, whether that be through cycle counters on the lifts or using the information within DVA about the number of cycles. The shaker plates have been mentioned in terms of creating that additional, I guess, pressure on the scissor legs and on those the actual the pivots and all of that. So that's all being looked at as well. We will lean heavily on the advice that comes through to us from the engineering side about what is appropriate. These are all subject to lift regulations. They have to be, and that's all relevant as well. So the standard of the inspection and what that looks like all has to be part of a very, very regimented regime.
And thanks for that. Do you see MAHA putting a time limit on these lifts now, considering the issues they've had across Europe and the south of Ireland here? Do you see them putting a very specific, so many lift cycles, that's it, we want them changed? And I appreciate if you could maintain them regularly and inspect them to satisfy yourselves. Whose advice are you going to weigh towards there? Because MAHA could at a point in 3 years say, we reckon you change these.
Well, I mean,
for commercial reasons and lots of reasons.
No, and I appreciate that. I suppose, you know, if we look at in the engineering report and the item that you have highlighted there, they're saying that the MAHA geo-operating instructions state, right? So it is putting the 22,000 load cycles. It's specifying that there, but it is saying that the life expectancy shall be evaluated and scheduled by a qualified person during the annual inspection, the annual safety inspection. So I think that's the key for us. I don't think that we'd need to see if there's an extension or a reduction. It's unlikely to be so. But the key for me is the counters, the strength in design, and having a much more robust inspection regime. For me, that is to do with the checklist of inspections to make sure that it covers many more items than it did before. And I think not preempting the audit report, but for me, what I would like to be considering is the skills of those that are carrying out the repairs as well. Then we have said we're going to add an additional layer of independent assessment on a regular basis as well. I think that, for me, represents kind of an extensive and a new approach that has a number of checks and balances in there that hadn't existed up to this point.
Okay. And just one final question, a different topic. With respect to Translink and the issues they're incurring, what discussions have you had with them, and have you any plans to solve the problems they're incurring?
Do you mean the funding problems in Translink?
Yes.
So obviously, yeah, there's been critical pressures on Translink's budget, and it's eaten into its reserves because there was significant budget cuts to the department from 2015-16. I'm very keen that, for me, a vibrant public transport network is critical. It's not just an issue for my department. It's actually critical to the delivery of the programme for government outcomes for every government department. So I've made representations on a number of occasions to the Finance Minister and executive colleagues, and I am hopeful that they recognise the importance of our public transport network to our programme for government, and also particularly for connecting communities and tackling the climate emergency. And I understand Translink are coming up today.
They are, and members, actually, because we are very restricted in time with the Minister, I would appreciate if questions were kept very much on the MOT situation rather than deviating off that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms Kimmins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your report. You know, it's good to get an update, and I suppose from Julie, you first were in front of the committee regarding this, we've progressed quite a bit. Just Keith has touched on a few of the points I was going to raise around the shelf life of the new lifts. In the report it said, and you've mentioned in your brief there as well, that there's 22,000 load cycles for kind of the expected usage of the lifts, and that's the standard version. These are obviously a non-standard version with the shaker plates, I suppose, and it's a wee bit concerning that they've seen maybe 150, 160,000 lifting cycles in their lifetime so far. So I suppose really going forward, and obviously we don't want to be in this situation again, the new lifts, do we have a clear life expectancy or shelf life, whatever you want to call it, in terms of how many lifting cycles they will be able to complete? I know that you've said there that there's a design modification, so they're reinforced, they're hopefully stronger. So it's really just so we are clear on that, because I know when we first asked these questions, when this issue first arose, we weren't clear on what the shelf life was, and now that we do have an indication, I think it is important that we know that going forward. And just a very small point regarding the TECs, an issue that was raised to me is that, and this I suppose can happen, where maybe a motorist has missed the date for their deadline for their MOT, so that when they do go to book, they're having difficulties booking it because it's past. They're not then able to get a TEC, is my understanding. Is that the case, or what way? It's just for advice going out, because I know you've said there that there are some issues around clarity and what will happen there.
If you want to take the lifts, anybody who, the responsibility is still on you to make your appointment for your MOT test, right? But if people don't make that and then try to get another appointment and are told, no, you can't get it, and no, you can't get a TEC, please advise them, or through yourself, contact DVA or contact my office, because I would be keen to work to try to resolve that. So if you are aware of any of those cases, please do feed them through, and we will work hard to resolve them.
I think the shelf life point is similar to what we've discussed there with Mr Buchanan around looking to see how long, the weight of the cars, how many counts they're going through, and I think both us and MAHA will want to look at those aspects of the contract with CPD advice and try and find something that works for everybody here. They will have their view of that, we will have ours, and we will use the advice of CPD to bring that together into a new contract, which we expect to have in place from the 1st of April.
So just to be clear then, at the minute we don't have a clear kind of idea of the amount of lifting cycles that they're designed to take.
Well, because it's a new model of a lift,
we'll
we'll have to work all that through.
Out. No, that's fair enough. That's grand. Thank you.
And just to reassure, committee members that, I'm very clear that it needs to be a much more enhanced contract regime between DVA and MAHA, and for that to contain a much more robust inspection regime. So that will be scrutinised through DSO and others, because we need to get into a much better place. For all concerned, for MAHA as a company with a world-leading reputation, and also I want to be absolutely satisfied, so those things will be scrutinised, and I will be acting on the best procurement and legal advice that my department can provide me with.
Okay, no, and I suppose then before they're actually implemented and in their function, and then we will have that kind of idea then, because that would have to be part of the design specification.
Yeah, when the machines are installed, they'll be checked before they're fully operable. There will be a clear contract in place in terms of life cycles will be mentioned, then the maintenance regime, then the additional enhancements that I'm bringing forward. So I'll be providing the committee with all of that, and the committee will have full access to the 2 independent reports that I've commissioned.
Okay, thank you.
Mr Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the Minister and Julie for coming along. Previously Paul, and appreciate the work that's been done to date and come to the committee to provide this information. Just a few quick things, because I know the Minister's going to be here for a short period of time. Just in relation to the wider capital project, so what impact does this have upon that, and does this maybe more of indicative of the reasons why we need to proceed with that project and seek funding to be able to do that? The other one is just in relation to the situation in the Republic of Ireland, and just give us an outline of what that is and if there's similarities in what we have experienced in the north. And the last one is really there was a desire to try to get this sort of completed and sort of around July, and whether how confident we are that that will be the deadline we'll get this concluded by.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the impact financially, the money that's being taken, the 1.8 million that's being spent in these lifts is coming from within DVA reserves, which is set aside for equipment replacement. So in essence, there will be no impact on kind of wider work by DVA. I think that everyone recognises that we need to be improving our MOT centres. We need to be making them fit for purpose. They need to be capable of diesel emission testing, and that's why I've said that I'm keen that the next phase for me, and I'm already working on it, is looking to see how we improve and modernise our MOT systems and our centres. Yes, it is going to cost a significant sum of money. We have plans for a new MOT centre in Belfast, looking to try to begin to address the diesel emissions testing. So I'm very clear that, in the difficulties that this situation has presented, there is an opportunity to do much better in terms of our MOT centres and testing for DVA staff and customers, and that's why I'm considering a range of things, including the biennial testing. In the south, obviously, as in Europe, the situation emerged with the cracks in the lifts, but again, in the south, they're purchasing new lifts from MAHA. I think that's a reflection that MAHA is a world leader, and the issue is not so much the supply of the equipment. I just can speak with greater authority in terms of the situation in Northern Ireland. It was to do with use and with the inspection regime, and that's why we're correcting that going forward. In terms of confidence around the mid-July, we were very clear when I made the decision to buy the new lifts that it had to be under an accelerated production programme, which MAHA agreed to, and they have given us assurances that all 52 lifts will be produced and delivered by mid-July, and we've made it very clear that that's an important commitment. It's a commitment that I've passed on to the public, and the one thing that I do not want to be doing is adding any further confusion to the public, so we're very clear that given that commitment, that needs to be honoured.
And that will continue to be obviously very closely monitored with MAHA over the coming weeks.
Thank you.
So.
As a consequence of purchasing new lifts and the possibility of moving to biennial testing, obviously that will have a further impact on the reserves within DVA. Are we likely then to see an increase in the cost of MOTs and then therefore passing that cost on to the customer?
I think that what I need to do is, it's why I'm reluctant to make any kind of announcements, but I want to be open with people about what I'm actively considering. I am actively considering the biennial testing, and I have to consider all of the ramifications from that. I think what it could possibly do is it could release capacity in our MOT centres. It could allow us to improve and address the carbon or the emissions testing, but I need to weigh up the cost of that. The benefits to customers of certain vehicles not having to go on an annual basis, is that weighed up by any changes to fees or so forth? I haven't made a definitive decision on that, but I obviously will consider everything in the round before I get to making a decision on it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Chair, and could I thank the Minister welcome. And we've, I know there's some of my colleagues outlined that there's still a few communication problems, but in the whole, there's a lot of things been dealt with from the first meeting. But Minister, I just want to go to the report. We got an executive report, some executive summary. Sorry, can we have the full report at some point?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide the full report to the committee. Yeah,
no problem. I just wanted to refer to the key observations on the arm. Slightly concerned at points 2 and point 4 of that, and I'll just read them out just for the record. Point 2, it says, in some instances, the cracking described in point 1 was observed to propagate into the underside of the RHS scissor legs. It was not possible to quantify the number of legs affected due to the presence of steel plates noted in point 4. And if you go down to point 4, it says that because of these plates being welded on, you couldn't exactly quantify or inspect the cracking properly. Now, that's slightly concerning, because it doesn't give an overall view of the issue. I'm just wondering, what's your assessment of that in relation to that report? Because it reads as if, I understand that they undertook some remedial work to try and address some of the issues, but what the report's reading here saying is that there was plates over there, so it couldn't be observed exactly what was going wrong, and that doesn't give a full assessment of exactly what did go wrong, so.
Yeah, so there was some remedial work being carried out on the lifts. Very early on, though, an independent assessment said that they couldn't give a full guarantee in terms of the quality assurance of that repairs, which is why we took the decision to take all of the lifts with cracks out of operation on the 21st of January. It's clear to me when we look at the inspection regime, we also have to look at the repair work, and we need to make sure that both elements are robust and that all is being carried out by people with proper qualifications. Again, the audit report will look at the governance systems around all of that, and I think that will be important in terms of informing the way forward.
No, that was my follow-up question, Chair, was clearly the audit report will undertake to look specifically, because it reads, if you read the report that way, it looks as if the plates were welded over just to cover up the cracks was there, as opposed to saying that it should have been remedial work they were trying to carry out. That's just the way the report
I know.
reads.
I honestly don't think it's fair to say that, I wouldn't want to give any implication that there was remedial work carried out to cover up cracks. I think there was welding work that took place, and I think that upon independent assessment, a decision was taken by DVA that they couldn't give get enough assurances, so that's why they took the precautionary measure of taking the lifts out of operation. I think that was the right one. But I think going forward, it is about a much more robust inspection and maintenance regime and having greater confidence in the repair regime as well. And I think the important element, and I've mentioned a number of times, is around equipment replacement and having a very clear cycle and plan in place.
I know, and Minister, I'm not implying that. I'm only
No,
saying
I know.
But the point is, because that now gives the full clarity to the report and to the inspection team, because if they're going to remedy this, that's where the problems all lay, was in the scissors. So it's actually an engineering issue, you know, so you've already answered the question.
Yeah, the engineers obviously have looked at it, and by the time they looked at it, of course, the lifts were already not in operation. The welding has been put in place. The quality of that welding was called out on, you know, at the 27th of January. That's why they all went down. And therefore, making sure that we have the right regimes in place for the future that will enable this to be avoided. That's the important thing going forward.
And obviously, hopefully the audit report will reflect that. Just one final question, Minister. In terms of the taxis, obviously I could contact with someone. No, in terms of the
AVA.
taxi.
Okay.
It's the MOTs, yeah. Oh, no, Chair. No, Chair, no, I know, don't record that, by the way. I know, Chair, I know completely. There are taxis still being MOT'd. I'm reflecting on the tax. Is there an issue in terms of taxis getting...
I haven't had any issues with taxis not given MOT or PSV tests, because it's different, being able to access those tests. But if you are aware of any taxi drivers who aren't, please do contact me, because I recognise it's their livelihood. So that's why I identified them very quickly on as a priority group, and we've put out the helpline number. So please, if you're aware of any taxi drivers, because I'm not, who haven't been able to get their PSV test, let me know.
Okay. We'll talk about taxis regulations on another day, Chair, on another day.
Yes.
Put that on the record. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Ms Kelly.
Well, thanks very much. And could I just welcome the Minister's commitment to openness and transparency, and I hope that's a principle that will be established across all government departments. But in, following the difficulties and the initial concerns by the public, I mean, the complaints seem to have tapered off substantially. I just wonder, is there any sort of analysis of the number of complaints, and you know, whether there were geographical hotspots where it wasn't dealt with as well as it ought to have been?
We can certainly tell on the number of phone calls, and you're absolutely right, the number of phone calls has dropped dramatically from the very early days, where everybody, I think, was in a lot of confusion about exactly how this was operating. So we know that in terms of a geographical analysis, it'll depend. You know, I don't think the phone systems will give us that, to be fair. We know where correspondence has come from and various things like that coming into email boxes, but we haven't examined exactly where the hotspots are. What we are doing is, and it's actually relatively straightforward for them to do, if we have the details, we can sort these cars out really, really quickly. The capacity is there to put the priority vehicles through. The priority line being open from the middle of February, I think, has also helped immensely, because it's giving people a place to actually go and make those phone calls and be actually speaking to people who can get them sorted out. So, as Minister says, we are in a much better place now than what we were, and we're not aware of a whole host of people who are having difficulties. The TECs has also become an automated process, which was manual at the start, and we believe that is also helping people to get more and better and earlier sight of those TECs coming through, because I think people were maybe anxious at home when they hadn't actually received a TEC through the post and were having to trust that it would come through. And now, because that process is automated, we're getting them out much, much earlier.
Well, that's very helpful, and the improvements in the communication, I think, will allay a lot of public concern and anxiety. Thank you.
Okay, no one else has indicated. Mr. Buchanan, just
a quick question. On the two lifts that you have previously fitted, they upgraded to withstand the heavier load? I'd appreciate that we're maybe got in a bit of a hurry to get the thing operational. So just what you're doing with the two existing lifts?
Yeah, they're referred to in the engineering report, I think, just above, in the paragraph above the recommendations. So they were inspected, and they have exceeded the 22,000 life cycle. But in the expert engineering report, they're saying that they're still fine for working, but what they're saying is, you know, the inspection regime needs to keep an eye, and also you need to be scheduling these lifts for replacement alongside the others at a future date. So they were fully inspected by White Young Green, and are fine to be operable. They have no concerns
But is
about them.
Mahal going to upgrade those?
The two brand new
Yeah,
lifts,
yeah.
the two brand new lifts do have the extra
Yeah.
plates within them as well. Okay.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Okay, thank you. No
Thanks.
one else has indicated, so thank you very much for attending this
Yep.
morning. Obviously, the committee will still want to continue to
Absolutely.
be briefed in relation to this, particularly around PECs and any changes or slippage even in the timescales for installation.
Thank you. And can I just again place on record my appreciation for the support of the committee? It has been a difficult time, you know, when you think of the number of people on a daily basis who have MOT tests. So to thank you all for your support. Also to put on record my appreciation to DVA staff, because they have worked very hard, and also the people in our test centres are going over and beyond, you know, in a difficult, stressful time. And also to place on record my appreciation for the patience of members of the public in terms of allowing us to deal with this situation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, members, any comments or any follow-up that you wish to do at this stage? We'll return to this. Thank you. Moving then to our next briefing, item 7, which is from Translink. And again, Hans Sword.
Sorry, Chair.
Hans Sword
Can I
will
just
report
ask for
the
some
meeting.
clarity just before we move there? Because I'm just looking at the papers, and there's some matters I would like to raise under the Minister's first day brief, but it's crossing over in between the two. So if you want, I'll raise it under AOB.
We'll raise it
Agenda.
later.
Okay, just
later
want to
stage.
draw attention to it.
The Translink briefing is at page 204, and we welcome
Good morning.
Mr Chris Conway, Chief Executive Translink, and Mr Paddy Anderson, Chief Financial Officer from Translink. You're both very welcome to committee this morning, and if you would like to open the session with a short report, and we'll follow up with some questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for the opportunity to meet with you today. You'll have read the brief which we sent in, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of the points in my opening before handing back to the Chair. Translink is a public corporation established under the Transport Act. Its subsidiary companies are Ulsterbus, Metro and Northern Ireland Railways, which includes the responsibility for the operations of the railway and also the infrastructure of the railway. Translink operates 13,000 bus and train services each day, carrying over 1.5 million passenger journeys per week and taking around 80,000 young people to school every day. We have an extensive fleet of buses and trains requiring ongoing servicing and maintenance. We also manage 300 miles of rail track and associated structures, valued at over £3 billion. This is a national asset which requires ongoing maintenance and renewal, as well as managing bus and train station and halts throughout Northern Ireland. We are seeing a resurgence in public transport usage, and passenger numbers are over 85 million journeys this year, highest in over 20 years, and with demand continuing to grow. This supports the Programme for Government Vision and the delivery of most of the 12 strategic outcomes, as well as directly linking with wider government policy on climate change, sustainable energy, social inclusion, public health and clean air. Recent successes are Glider, which was a Northern Ireland Executive flagship project, connecting East and West Belfast with greater than 45,000 additional passengers per week on this corridor, with increased usage by people with disabilities and the elderly, and a significant reduction in emissions. Rail upgrades include the Coleraine to Derry Londonderry, with the addition of an hourly service, Newry service enhancements, and the construction of the North West Transport Hub and Portrush Station. Metro, Ulsterbus and Gold Line enhancements have also been made over the last 3 years, where possible within funding constraints, and Foyle Metro has also been introduced. Translink also supports the tourism industry with large events, notably the Open at Portrush, which had 200,000 visitors using public transport, and the Balmoral Show on an annual basis. And we've also introduced an integrated website and journey planner with 25% growth in online ticket sales, increasing accessibility to public transport. In terms of resource funding, approximately 80% of Translink's turnover comes from passenger carriage and 20% from public service obligation funding. This is a highly efficient split between passenger carriage and public service obligation funding, and is only achieved by cross-subsidy across the network. Public service obligation funding is agreed under a public service agreement, and this is a contract under EU Regulation 1370/2007, and is paid out for routes which are socially necessary but not commercially viable. Translink has been relying on our reserves and in-year funding bids to maintain these services, coupled with letters of comfort from the Department for Infrastructure that as a minimum it would support Translink to meet its going concern requirements. This situation has been brought about by a significant reduction in the Department for Infrastructure budget in 2015-16. However, Translink has continued to deliver these services in good faith to support the social, economic and environmental well-being of Northern Ireland. Translink now has a legitimate expectation to be appropriately funded in line with the commitments made. And given the contractual nature of these commitments, we were surprised that in-year funding was not allocated by the Northern Ireland Executive in January, as these costs, coupled with a gap in concessionary fares income, are inescapable in our view. We do now need urgent clarification on these matters, and in addition to a recent meeting with the Infrastructure Minister, we have also asked for a meeting with the Finance Minister to seek clarification on the Northern Ireland Executive's intent with regard to these socially necessary services funded through a public service obligation, along with the concessionary fares scheme. However, Translink remains committed to work with the Infrastructure Minister to deliver the strategic outcomes of the draft programme for government, to connect people and opportunities through our infrastructure, and very much welcome the Minister's stated commitment to public transport, recognising the social and economic benefits, as well as the urgent climate change crisis and the health risks associated with poor air quality. In terms of capital funding, we have a backlog in bus fleet investment and rail infrastructure investment, as well as enhancements needed on the enterprise service for both higher frequency and journey time improvements. The Department for Infrastructure urgently needs to agree a multi-annual contract over approximately a 10-year period so that we can take a long-term sustainable approach to our critical infrastructure, rather than the short-term and annual budget approach. Notwithstanding these issues, we have continued to push ahead with key capital projects for public transport, including the Belfast Transport Hub, which is Northern Ireland Executive flagship project, the Translink future ticketing system, which will make public transport more accessible, and, as you're aware, the hydrogen bus project as an example of capital projects which will continue to support the growth and development of public transport and also address climate change. In summary, public transport is crucial to the social, economic and environmental well-being of Northern Ireland, tackling climate change and poor air quality. Translink are committed to support the Infrastructure Minister and the Northern Ireland Executive to improve the well-being for all, as per the draft programme for government. However, we can't do it alone. We have continued to deliver services in good faith over the last 3 to 4 years. We now need the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure the continued delivery of vital public transport services in Northern Ireland. In addition, just to conclude, the current funding issues for public transport infrastructure are critical, but public transport infrastructure has been underfunded in Northern Ireland for many years. You just have to go back to the 2015 Northern Ireland Audit Office report to see that. And given the cross-cutting nature of public transport to support the programme for government outcomes and the commitments of the new decade new approach to tackle climate change head-on and turbocharge infrastructure delivery, I think it's important now that the Northern Ireland Executive send a clear message that it is open for business by investing in an efficient and attractive public transport network. And I'm sure many people, including the elderly, people with disabilities, young people, commuters, etc., who depend on public transport on a daily basis to get to work, education, or simply to combat loneliness, would like to hear this message also. I've laid some funding comparisons for you in the brief, which I think help to show what other regions in the UK and Ireland are doing to develop and grow public transport in the face of the climate change crisis that now exists.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's it.
And to start with the positive, can I congratulate you on Transport Hub and obviously the success of the glider. And I hope that members around this table have been taking the opportunity to use the glider, because it is a superb service into the city.
Thank you.
In your submission, you've stated that Translink has legitimate expectation to be appropriately funded by DFI, and in the paper that we have tabled today from the Department, it says, as per the public service agreement between the Department and Translink, the Department must compensate Translink for its discharge of the public service obligation of running the public transport network within Northern Ireland. So, in your opinion, is the Department now in breach of that contract and that agreement?
Yes, there are a number of factors in that. We have a contract through the Public Service Agreement, and that is part of an EU regulation. We also have had letters over the past 3 to 4 years from permanent secretaries of the Department reaffirming their commitment to that, even though they weren't able to have a budget, and we used our reserves during that period. They reaffirmed their commitment to those services on an ongoing basis. We have an MSFM which also articulates the funding requirement as well. And even as recently as 6 months ago, we got an extension to the public service agreement, which again committed the department to ongoing stability of the services and commitment to the service on an ongoing basis. So based on all of that, we do believe we have a legitimate expectation to receive the funding for those services. It's not really a route we choose to go down, but it certainly is a backstop for the board of directors for Translink if we have to use that. We would prefer to work with government and try to get a solution to the ongoing funding issues.
So moving forward, obviously, you've stated that Translink has now reached that critical point, that the directors will be obliged both legally and practically to take action to ensure that, obviously, Translink is a going concern. So what exactly will that mean for you as a board?
Well, as a board, we have used our reserves for the last 3 to 4 years. We're now at a point where those reserves are at a minimum level for us to assure our long-term viability. This is not a short-term solvency issue, it's about long-term viability. We have to make sure we have enough reserve to manage any risks that might happen in the business on an ongoing basis, and we have to retain those at a certain level. And we've had that independently assessed as well. So now that we can no longer use our reserve to fund the services going forward, what we're asking is that the Department and the Northern Ireland Executive make a commitment to those services going forward. They're very much cross-cutting in nature. They provide social inclusion for people. They are critical to health, to education, to the economy. And in reality, given the cross-subsidised nature of our service, they are good value for money. If those services weren't there, there would be impacts on the health budget and the education budget and on the economy. So really, it makes good sense, as well as everything else, to do those. So what we're trying to do is work through this period to get a commitment, and as I said, we've sent a letter to the Finance Minister to see if we can meet with the Finance Minister to understand what the commitments will be in the budget coming forward. Obviously, Translink has legal responsibilities, and the Board of Directors have legal responsibilities. And I suppose our next step, we believe we have a very strong legal case on the Public Service Agreement in any case. And I suppose that would be our next step if we weren't able to reach agreement with the government in the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, NIT, HC and Translink will be regarded by many as being asset-rich. Are you content that the estate which you also manage is being fully utilised and contributing to the company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the majority of our assets are actually operating train stations, bus stations, engineering facilities. We do have some commercial assets which are attached to those facilities, but very small in nature now compared to years gone by. And we work with the Strategic Investment Board to commercialise those assets and get best value for money for them. And we get a revenue return from those assets on an annual basis, and that actually goes to offset our public service obligation as well. If we can't get a market return for those assets, we then will sell them as well, and we've sold over £1 million worth of assets over the last couple of years as well. And again, we work very closely with SIB to make sure we get good returns from those assets.
Okay, but of course, once it's sold, it's sold. You can only sell it once.
Thank you.
Okay, just with regards to, you referenced in your papers about the ageing fleet, some vehicles are over 15 years of age. Just to maintain reliability and safety of the fleet, how often should vehicles be replaced?
Well, our average age of our Ulster bus fleet is around 10 years. The normal for the industry would be around 7 years old. That means we have fleet older than 15 years, and we would have Gold Line fleet which would have 1 million miles on the clock. So to give an example of what we're maintaining. The real challenge is, I mean, I have a responsibility as Chief Executive to health and safety of those 1.5 million passengers that use our service every week, and we have a very strong commitment to safety. So those vehicles are all kept at a high level of safety and a high standard of maintenance to stay on the road. But there is a cost to that. There's a maintenance cost and a serviceability cost, and obviously having fleet of the right age enables us to actually reduce our maintenance cost and reduce our public service obligation as well. And also there is a factor for, we see with Glider, and we've seen with some new buses we put in, for example, on the Irby routes as well, that people respond to newer vehicles, better facilities, and it increases passenger usage. And we really need to continue to invest in our fleet for that reason as well. But certainly it is a cost that we don't need to bear running old fleet.
Okay, and finally for me, again in the paper with regards to rail infrastructure, you state that the backlog of maintenance would require £55 million per year, and that's over a 10-year period. And this is obviously to maintain the existing network. Obviously, if we were to move to electrification, that would be further investment. What is the estimated costs in relation to that?
Well, what we've done on our railway infrastructure is to do an independent assessment of what's required on an annual basis to maintain it. I suppose people don't really see the infrastructure on a day-to-day basis when they're using the trains, but in reality parts of our infrastructure are very old and have had just limited maintenance to keep them running. We have rail track on our network which dates pre-1976, for example. So we've done an assessment of all the critical areas on our network, and we estimate that we will need to spend around £55 million per annum over the next 5 to 10 years to bring our network as it currently sits without any additional enhancements to it, just to maintain it and renew the key assets on it. In terms of moving forward to either extensions or electrification, we haven't done a full assessment of what will be required, but that is something we're currently working on, particularly with the decarbonisation of public transport. We will have to consider some electrification. There are new technologies on trains now where you can operate in bi-mode, so you can have batteries and electrification, so you only need to do partial electrification of the network. So I wouldn't have a figure for that at the minute, Chair, but it is something we're actively working on.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Chair, and Chris, thanks very much for your presentation. And just to seek some clarity, I know you're saying you didn't want to go down the route, but I did address this issue when the officials were in relation to breach of contract. There's a legal statute there for challenge. If you need to use it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we would be in a position where we have a legal expectation to receive that based on all the information I've already outlined, and you know that could be a route we go down. It's very much not a route we prefer to go down. We prefer very much to work with government and to reach a resolution to the issues.
That's certainly just seeking clarity. And we all know, just obviously you had discussions there, you said with the Minister, and we all know that there's viable and non-viable routes out there. And I mean, I speak in the context of protecting the rural services. I mean, you know, it addresses isolation and all of that and supports rural communities. Is there any discussions or have you had to reconsider any of your plan, given that you know you have been underfunded for a number of years?
Well, any enhancements we've made to the service, we've always been very conscious of what the funding is there. So we've always had to look at to make sure we don't increase the funding that's required. So we've either looked at improving a commercial route at the same time as doing an adjustment maybe to a socially necessary route, and making sure that we can afford that within the current budget. It has limited our ability. There are more things we'd like to do, but it has limited our ability to do those because of the uncertainty around funding.
No, there was a report last year. I mean, it supports 6,000 jobs and a GVAF, nearly 200 million. I mean, it's a massive contribution to the economy. But I just want to know the Chair had asked a number of questions that I want to ask myself, but just want clarity on another point. Say in terms of, you have dug into your reserves. What's the bare minimum of the percentage that you would have to hold on to in terms of
about 10% of our turnover is approximately the way we work. It's a little bit like your personal savings. You know, you want a couple of months of your income to see you through any critical issues you might have to face. So that tends to be the way we work. As I say, we did do an independent assessment of that, working through our working capital needs and you know, any critical issues that we might be faced with. And that was the independent assessment that we got.
And I appreciate because of an interest in the climate change stuff. I mean, clearly you've introduced some new measures. Have you any for the plans? Or?
Yeah, we've both a bus fleet strategy and a rail fleet strategy looking at decarbonisation of public transport. We've introduced the hydrogen as a pilot project, and it's really a collaboration between ourselves, bus manufacturer, Right Bus, and also Energia, the electricity supplier, who are using their wind farm to produce hydrogen. We're also looking at procurement of some electric fleet as well later this year, and we'll be using both of those as pilots. Queen's University are also going to do a piece of collaborative work with us to assess which routes are best used for hydrogen, electric, or even to maintain on diesel for a longer period of time, depending on the efficiency of the different technologies. And we would plan over that our future procurements for Metro would all involve either hybrid or full electric fleet going forward, both Metro in Belfast and Foyle Metro as well. And then we would start the transition for Ulster Bus and Gold Line beyond that. We also have a strategy for a rail fleet as well. We have some new fleet coming into the service over the next couple of years, but then after that we'll be starting to look at more efficient fleet and looking at some bi-mode technologies as well that can be used on rail fleet.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. Chris, Paddy, you're very welcome. It's more nice to see you.
Thank you, David.
2 weeks ago, there's a departmental official here, and in response to one of our colleagues, indicated that there was almost a doomsday situation coming, where the collapse of the whole transport system here in Northern Ireland. What would your answer or assessment of that statement be?
Well, at the minute, as I've said, my priority is to work with government to find a solution, and I appreciate that. The budget is all happening around March, and the new financial year starts in April. So it is really critical. It is a critical issue, and I don't want in any way take away from the fact that this is a critical issue and is of great concern to Translink and to the board, and I'm sure to a lot of people who use our services on a daily basis.
There's a lot of media attention, and yes, users were concerned.
Yeah, and
questions being asked.
And so I say, first priority is to work with government. If the government decided that these services, they couldn't afford them, we again would have a legal expectation to a transitionary phase to do that. It would be unlikely that we'd have a situation where everything would just stop one morning. We would work through a transitionary phase to do that, and Translink would be committed to work with government on that.
Sorry, the departmental official also indicated what type of services you would probably drop first and whatnot.
Yeah.
Have you had any of that detailed conversation at all?
No, we're not. I don't think it's right to speculate on that. I don't think it's right to create panic around what's going to happen to public transport, particularly when there's enough other things to be panicking about at the minute. Our duty is to continue to run those services, maintain those services for people who are urgent need of them. And I think we've got to remember that 1 in 5 people in Northern Ireland don't have access to a car, and they rely on public transport, as well as people with disabilities, the elderly, and all those urgent needs, in addition to commuters, supporting the economy, and also addressing the whole issue of climate change. So I think we just need to take a step-by-step approach to this. The first approach is to get government's commitment and understanding of what they intend to have in the budget going forward, and then from that we can make assessment of any transitionary plans or how we would manage the service going forward. That's our responsible approach to it. We have mentioned that at some point the directors will have to take their legal responsibilities into account, but as I've said already, our first step on that would be to press the department and the executive around the legal contract that we currently have with them, and the ability to exercise that.
Yeah, and just on those sort of legal responsibilities, then you mentioned reserves and various things there, but would the company then have a limit on what sort of debt they can actually carry?
Well, we don't carry any debt as such. We would operate on a working capital basis to manage our reserves. So any debt that Translink would get into would actually be the government's debt as well.
Right.
So we have very limited ability to get into debt ourselves.
Okay, and just on the sort of the green environmental stuff, and you're doing some great work at that level and hoping to introduce a few different schemes, but how are you funding that? Does that come out of a separate sort of environmental fund, or does that come out of your ordinary budget? Or
it comes out of our ordinary budget. On the hydrogen buses, for example, we applied for a grant through OLEV, through the Office of Low Emission Vehicles. So they gave us a top-up grant for the hydrogen buses, for example, and for the hydrogen fueling station. And then the base capital for a standard bus came out of our normal capital for bus fleet. Okay.
And finally, here's probably one you weren't expecting, but have you been any discussions in relation to the coronavirus with government at this stage? Because it's obviously a lot of users on our public transport
absolutely.
system.
We have been having regular calls with the PHA now for a number of weeks, and we will continue to do that. and we're taking all the precautions that they advise us to. Most of them are the precautions that everyone else has been advised to do, which is about hand washing and making sure we take proper precautions in that area. We've also been asked to display some posters in public transport to advise the public, for example, and we've done that with our employees as well. I think the guidance from the PHA is very much that people using public transport are at no greater risk than the general public, and that's true for employees as well. And therefore, it's about taking the normal guidance that the Public Health Authority is asking everyone to take.
Okay, thank you. I have a few local issues, but I'll save them for another day.
Thank you, Ms Kimmins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris, for your update. And I suppose, as someone's quite new to the Assembly and new to the committee, it was great to go down to see the new hydrogen buses, and it's a very positive story in light of all of this. And as Mr Hilditch said, we had quite a grim update from one of your colleagues a few weeks ago, so hopefully we will see start to see a wee bit of positivity. I suppose it's important to note that, in terms of the underfunding and the reduction in funding here, we are dealing with Tory austerity this last 10 years, and I think the money that has been cut could be used for public transport and public services. That we're seeing this right across the board, and I think everybody here realises that at this stage. So we have an uphill battle in respect of that, I suppose. Just a couple of questions in terms of the concessionary fares, and I know there's a £90 million shortfall there. In relation to that, if that's not met, have you any plans? Is there any sort of backup plan on how that would be addressed? Just yesterday we had a motion in council or in assembly, on crime and older people, and one of the biggest issues there was around social isolation, and that's something that's mentioned in your briefing document. That public transport plays a huge role in addressing social isolation for many groups of people. So, that would be really concerning if those were taken away or limited. And also, will the criteria be changing on that? Is how will we determine going forward who will have access to concessionary fares?
Yeah, so as far as this year goes, we funded that through our own reserves. The gap of about £10 million has been funded through that. We obviously can't continue that going into next year, and that really begs the question to government as to what the concessionary fares policy is. The policy as it stands, if that's going to continue, it will need a greater budget to go with it. Policy can't be put down without a budget to match it. So that's what we've been asking for. There are lots of areas where concessionary fares could be enhanced, particularly with young people, in my view. We have a half fare at the minute for people up to 16, and then once they're at a point where they're thinking about getting a car, we charge them a full fare for public transport. So there are areas like that I think we could make better use of the concessionary fares budget. But in terms of how that gets set, that's really a policy issue for government. Translink administers the scheme. And that's our role really, to administer that in line with the budget and the policy. But at the minute we've a mismatched policy and budget, and we need to get that matched again.
Yeah, and I suppose that's very important too. It's very much an issue that affects all departments, so there needs to be good cross-departmental thinking on this, because it impacts in so many different areas. Just a quick question on you mentioned there about the extra maintenance money for rail. So it's just to clarify, is that for the entire rail network, or is it for specific lines?
No, that's for the entire rail network. We've been funding around 25 to 30 million a year of on maintenance on the rail network. It needs to be up to 55 million a year to manage the ongoing maintenance, and it's an ageing asset as well. So, as I said, with the bus fleet, if you have an ageing asset, then the maintenance bill goes up while you're trying to maintain it.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Buchanan.
Okay, just on the glider, welcome the success on it. And I don't assume you have any plans to get that to Cookstown as yet.
Not yet.
Just on, I suppose, just to pick up on my colleague's point regarding the whole coronavirus thing. Where do you see that? Well, we don't know where that's going, obviously, but for the public transport point of view, that is worrying. So have you any other additional plans apart from public health information?
Well, we're pretty much following the public health information as a result of the information that came out from the UK government yesterday. And we are putting together a business continuity plan as well. So how would we ensure we maintain vital services if we had a higher absence rate than normal, for example, due to the coronavirus? And again, the Public Health Agency, in terms of protecting public transport, are saying no greater risk in public transport than in any other, any other service that people are using, and therefore we should, be vigilant and make sure we make people aware of hygiene and all of those issues. But there's no further guidance other than that at this point.
Okay, and then on your public service agreement, and excuse me for not knowing this, how often is that signed, or how often is that signed with government? Is there a period of time that runs for, or is that a continuous run?
That was signed in 2015.
For a period of? For
an initial period of 5 years. It was 2015 it was signed, but it was 5 years starting in March 2016, that new financial year. It ran from 5 years to 2021.
Okay.
And then the government has taken up an option to extend it by a year to 2022.
So it's still a live agreement?
It's still a live agreement, yeah.
So do you see yourself, have you a plan B up your sleeve that if government are not forthcoming with your shortfall, of going down the legal route?
Well, that's the obvious next step for us, is to do that. It's not a step I really would choose to take, but obviously it is open to us, and we have a legitimate expectation to meet the needs of the public service agreement.
And your conversations with the Minister, obviously you've had conversations with the Minister?
Yes.
And have you get any indication or light from those conversations?
Yeah, well, the Minister was very positive and very committed to public transport. She said that very openly in a number of cases, and we very much welcome that. I think the Minister would say to us that until she'd get a budget agreed with the Department of Finance and with the Northern Ireland Executive, she can't give any further commitments. But she's very supportive of public transport and wants to see the right funding put in place to address it going forward, and that's why we, want to meet with the Finance Minister as well. And to be fair, you could do a round robin and meet with the ministers from all the departments, because all of the departments are impacted by, any decisions on public transport.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Sanderson.
Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. And just like Keith, I think I listen with envy about the glider and look forward to the day when we see a glider in Derry. But I suspect we may be waiting a long time. If we could just get a train from Derry to Belfast that takes us quicker than a car, that would be viewed as progress where I come from. And I'm hoping that we do actually arrive at that point in the not too distant future. Just as Liz had said, we're very conscious of the fact that there's a 600 million hole in the executive budget, and then we had New Decade and New Approach that promised all things to many people, and with no funding then coming with it, despite the promises that engagement would take place, that people signed off to this. And we're now in a situation when it seems that we're getting nothing but consequential, in terms of Barnett consequential. But I would view this as the disaster of partition, and the consequence of this island being divided as it is, partitioned as it is, and there are obviously opportunities around an all-Ireland way of delivering for transport and everything else, despite it not being probably the shared view of others around this table, but it is a conversation that's going to be needed into the future. When you were talking about the biomodel trains taking place again, I would like to know the route. I'm suspecting it's not Derry to Belfast we're talking about. So if it's Dublin to Belfast, can we get an update on that? And can we also get an update on the extra maintenance that you talked about for rail? Is that for the entire network? Yeah. Or is that for just specifics? And then I would like to ask you another separate question.
Okay. Was your first question, Martina, just as I understand it, on when I mentioned new technology for trains? You just mentioned Belfast to Dublin there, so I'll just comment on that first of all. So obviously we have a separate strategic document on how we increase the frequency and the journey time on the Belfast to Dublin route. That works separately because it's a separate agreement between ourselves and Irish Rail from our local network, if you like. So that is something that ourselves and Irish Rail are putting together an appraisal into how we would first of all get to an hourly service on Belfast to Dublin, which would allow for better connection between Belfast and Derry, for example, as well. And also then how we look to journey time improvement and ultimately looking at electrification on that route as well, because Irish Rail have a plan to electrify the northern part of the network going into Dublin too, and that would make sense for us to look to that. When I talk about decarbonisation on our local rail network and looking at electrification, I'm really talking about the whole rail network at that point. I was over in Transport for Wales recently, just looking at, they have a full electrification programme for the valleys, for example, in Wales, and we're looking at the model that they're using, and they have bi-mode trains and looking at partial electrification, and we're keen to find out how well that would work and whether that's a technology we could use for our local network to decarbonise public transport. But that would be the entire network. In terms of the maintenance budget that I talked about, that is for the entire rail network in Northern Ireland. That's 300 miles of track. There's 1,600 civil structures on that network, bridges, culverts, signalling, user work crossings, level crossings. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure which has to be maintained on a regular basis. And as I said, we've sections of the rail track which are ageing now and areas where really need to be replaced urgently.
Could I deal with another matter? You mentioned in your opening comments about Translink being a public body. And I'm conscious that you're subject to Section 75, equality screening, equality duty. And I'm very conscious of the testimonies that are coming forward in the reports that we have about Translink as a policy, I believe now, a policy decision that was taken to allow the Home Office immigration officers and the Gardaí to stop, to board, to question, to examine, and to seek passports and other documents from passengers. When asked, I believe, by a number of organisations as to the change in this policy decision, I believe Translink had said that the policy decision is that they legally have to facilitate these checks. But this is not the case, I believe, given the exemptions in passport control, and I refer primarily to the British Immigration Act of 1971 that we're still operating under, and also the Irish government, the Irish exemption on the duties to carry that out as well. Their immigration law of 2004, and then it was amended in 2011. So my concern in relation to this is to ask a question about the legal obligations that Translink is referring to in response to its question, in that it is facilitating such checks, because in a democratic society, and Dolores and I, one time we were on the policing board together, and I know that she's working quite closely with this issue as well, in terms of understanding what the legal obligations are for people that are stopped, and to seek papers confirming their identity and the status. That's strictly controlled and clearly provided for by law. So what policy decision? Was it EQI aid? Was there screening done on this? And how come that the testimonies that we're getting, which is alarming if true, is that the reports that this is racial discrimination? Because we are being told the passengers are often singled out for questioning on the basis of their skin colour or of their ethnic indicators. So I'm extremely alarmed about this, and something that I'm very clear about the role of government departments in ensuring that their duty, their Section 75 duty, that there's an obligation of that duty that is taken forward, and policies such as this, policy changes as this, are screened in a way, and the consultation is done, and people are aware of such change.
So, Translink's responsibility only goes as far as if immigration or the Gardaí or the PSNI ask us to pull over, we have a responsibility to pull over. Whenever they board the vehicle, as you can appreciate, there's just a bus driver there. What the immigration officers or the PSNI or Gardaí do when they're on our vehicle is their responsibility, if you like. We don't facilitate that, we just pull over and apply, the proper protocols around a security official or an immigration official asking to board the vehicle, and we're required to do that, be it a bus or a train, and that's the legislation that we operate under. In terms of the legislation around what an immigration officer should be doing when he's on the vehicle, all of that, that's sort of outside of our remit. We don't see that as our responsibility as such. Happy to take advice on that, but that certainly is the legal advice that we have at the minute, is that our responsibility is to pull over if we're asked to pull over, to allow an officer on board if they ask to get on board. What they actually do when they're on board is not really our full responsibility. As you'd appreciate, we only have a bus driver on at that point in time.
Given the testimonies that have come about as a consequence of the boarding of the buses and then what has actually taken place in the buses, has this matter been brought to the Minister's attention, who again would probably probe what the immigration officers and others are supposed to be doing when they're on that bus to make sure that they are compliant with the law, as opposed to taking measures that are not in line with immigration law as it currently exists.
Yeah, I mean, Translink operate the same procedures as any private operator would operate as well. So, I mean, we're not doing anything different than any private operator would do as well. This issue was raised with us probably about 6 months ago or so I would say, and it hasn't been.
And it's growing. The concerns are growing. The accusation or the concerns in relation to racial discrimination, I am hearing them now quite often. And
but not by Translink,
No, the people that are singled out that are using Translink, that are paying to get on the buses, that are paying to go on a journey, to reach a destination, that the bus is pulled over, and then they are being subjected to what they feel is racial discrimination, and whatever about anybody feels about the bus being pulled aside, and the rights or wrongs of that, and people having to go on it and do whatever they have to do. But if there is racial profiling going on in such buses, or potential racial discrimination, then that needs stopped at source.
I appreciate that, but Translink's responsibility is to pull over if we're asked to pull over, as a private operator would be as well. And as I said, it's not a live issue with me at this point in time. I appreciate people have raised issues with immigration and other agencies in terms of how they're carrying those out, but we're just operating within the law, and that's our requirement.
Okay, I will take this matter further, maybe with the outside of the
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair. And for the record, I declare as a previous employee of Translink and also a councillor in Ards and North Down Borough Council. A couple of questions really. In relation to the resource funding, how reliant has Translink been on the monitoring rounds, and was the monitoring round most recently had an impact upon the situation which we've been discussing this morning? Yeah,
it is. I mean, I suppose in the last 2 years we've been able to secure some funding in the monitoring rounds, and that goes back to our legitimate expectation that we were going to receive some funding in this monitoring round as well. I believe the department did submit a bid in the monitoring round, we were a bit surprised that because we feel that some of those costs are really inescapable at the minute, and because of the contract that we have backing that up and the critical need for the people who are using those services, we were a bit surprised that wasn't addressed in the monitoring round. So we're now really left in a situation where we have a short space of time to get some commitment agreed between now and the budget.
In terms of that, is there a feeling that in terms of concessionary fares that does need to be fully funded to allow the continued operation of Translink? Because in essence the failure to fully fund the concessionary fares has us in the situation we're in.
Well, the concessionary fare scheme it's a policy decision by government. As it currently sits, it would need to be funded closer to £49 million a year. Whether the government decides to make a change to that or not would be a policy decision. We would also obviously comply with that, whatever the decision was made by government to do that, and adjust it appropriately.
Okay. When the officials here from the department were talking through flagship projects, and the view was given that they're consuming an awful lot of the capital expenditure and inhibiting the delivery of sort of run-of-the-mill sort of capital expenditure. One of the major flagship projects is the Belfast Transport Hub. Just outline the rationale for that to go ahead and why that's felt that should be a flagship project.
Well, it was designated a flagship project about 3 or 4 years ago, when that happens, it effectively means that the capital is ring-fenced for the life of that project. It's a very important project in terms of addressing capacity needs for a public transport network going forward. We will increase the number of railway platforms currently at GVS by double, so we'll increase them from 4 to 8. We'll also increase the number of GO line bus stands, so that will in effect be able to better connect regional areas right across Northern Ireland through both our GO line and our rail network, and that capacity is urgent. We're already carrying around 10 million passengers a year through GVS and Europa, and it's obviously not fit for purpose to do that. We can see continued growth in public transport, and there's urgent need really to provide that capacity. But in addition to that, it's a regeneration project, and it would help to regenerate that part of Belfast and South Belfast, which I think particularly Great Victoria Street used to be known as the Golden Mile when I was at university. It's a long way away from the Golden Mile now. and we see this as a great opportunity to regenerate. We've been to see this in London and Manchester and other areas where an investment in an asset like a train station or bus station has a regenerative effect across the area, and I think that's critical. And the other area is we want to improve journey time, improve access between Belfast and Dublin and between Belfast and Derry, Londonderry, and the moving the enterprise service round to operate from the Belfast Transport Hub will give us a better connectivity across the east coast of Ireland, the island of Ireland.
As part of that, is there a plan to retain the car park within the Great Northern Mall, and how does Translink feel that that fits having car parks alongside its advocacy for use of public transport?
The master plan for what we call Weaver's Cross is still being worked on at the minute, Andrew, and what we're doing is we're going out to procurement for a development partner to come on, because while the public sector is investing in the transport hub, we really want to bring the private sector in to work on the Weaver's Cross sort of master plan, and that will operate in phases, and depending on the market at the particular point in time and the sort of regeneration opportunities that there are, we'll be looking at that on a site-by-site basis.
In terms of that management of assets, and not just theirs, also Hyde Park as well, the Translink viewed take a consideration of whether they should retain those assets or they should release those as part of the sort of overall move towards more use of sustainable transport?
Well, I think all of those assets will transition into sustainable transport over time. I would imagine we would be looking at transitioning some of those to active transport hubs, for example, for greater parking for cycling, electric vehicles and other modes of transport as well. At the minute, those assets, which are mostly adjoining train stations and bus stations, actually generate, as I said earlier, generate a commercial return, which is significant and helps to offset the public service obligation.
And just to repeat, Andrew, as well, we work closely with a number of outside parties, the likes of Strategic Investment Board and other bodies in the private sector, to make sure we're getting the maximum return for those, so the call on the public purse is not increased.
Just one other one. In relation to, you talked about sort of active travel solutions, and what's been found is that when park and ride sites are delivered, that they fill up very, very quickly, and it's just what work Translink's trying to do in terms of trying to encourage more active travel solutions integrating with public transport. I think, for example, in relation to Bangor and Hollywood, where park and ride sites are full, and it's very difficult to get other land to be able to deliver those. So how can we try to improve more active travel solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is about working in partnership. We need to collaborate with the organisations, cycling organisations like Sustrans, like the local council, and with citizens themselves in terms of looking for behaviour change. A lot of journeys to park and rides are very short journeys, and if you look at the transport statistics, it will show that for journeys less than 2 miles, something like 60% of them are done by car, and we should be trying to encourage more people to use active travel, walking or cycling, for example. We have worked with the department to put in secure cycling storage at key points along the glider route, for example, and at some of our train stations. And again, that was in response to customers saying, well, they have a very expensive bike and they weren't comfortable just securing it in the open, and they wanted somewhere secure to put it. So we've provided secure facilities for them as well. So I think it is more and more, it's going to be about integrating cycling, public transport and walking into a complete journey. I think for a lot of people, one of the big challenges in moving away from the private car is the fact that you are actually going to have to use multiple modes rather than just get in one mode and complete your journey in one mode of transport, and that will require more use of active travel as well.
Just one last question. What potential is there for EU funding for the cross-border rail link upgrade?
I think there is potential for EU funding on that. The Peace Plus funding is currently out for consultation at the minute, and that would be one opportunity. And given the cross-border nature of it and the fact that it's a part of a TEN-T network within Europe and still will be after the UK leaves the EU, there's potential for joint funding from the EU and from the UK government.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask members to make sure that their phones are switched off, and certainly anyone in the public gallery as well is interfering with the sound system. Thank you, Ms Kelly.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I understand your point in response to Martina Anderson around racial profiling, but it might be an issue because I have concerns around it too, but it is something very much the border police seem to be managing themselves and with little redress our accountability to ourselves. So it might be a matter, Chair, that we might want to refer to the Executive Brexit Subcommittee, you know, to look in terms of building relationships over the longer term. But could I just take this opportunity to put on record my thanks to your colleagues in the Lurgan area who have worked very closely with the local community in attempting to diminish any disruption on the railway line by dissident Republicans. Lurgan Station was the most bombed station in Northern Ireland, as you well know, and the Dublin to Belfast line the most disrupted over the many years. So thanks to the approach taken by your officials. Can I turn to the conclusion of your report, and in particular I note the commitment and the by the executive, you know, where Translink is hitting a number of the strategic outcomes, but I'm trying to distill down the chart in terms of the expenditure in comparisons. If I read this rightly, Northern Ireland has just about £50 or £60 per person per head of population, where you're talking around 275 in England. Would that be correct? That's the level of disparity?
Yeah, that's expenditure per head of population on public transport, yes.
Could you just tell me what that is per head, roughly?
So that's about, so for Northern Ireland, which is the very bottom line, unfortunately mine's in black and white here, but the very bottom line is around £100 per head of population, whereas the average in the UK is somewhere around 250.
That's huge. I mean,
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you said you'd written to the Finance Minister. Are you hoping to meet him in the near future? You know, I know he's doing some work around with the British Treasury around the turbocharging of infrastructure.
Well, we've put a request in by letter, and we hope to get a response on that soon.
And is that for a meeting?
Is that for a meeting? Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for letting me back in. Just in relation to the green funding, I know that, wasn't it the Office for Low Emissions, we got funding for the hydrogen?
Yes, we did, yeah.
See, in terms of more opportunities for that, have you bid for more, or is there more opportunities to look at? Well, even on the new decade approach document, I'm sure because of the climate action.
Yeah. We are continuing to bid and talk to the Department for Transport and the Office for Low Emission Vehicles in collaboration with the Department of Infrastructure to look for opportunities for funding new technologies to decarbonise public transport. And I think there are, as you'll be aware, the UK government has announced something like £5 billion for bus and for decarbonising public transport in England. And we'd like to see if there's a way that we can access some of that, or at least have the same sort of approach in Northern Ireland.
And that obviously that would be cross-departmental, but I know you're responsible on the...
Yeah, well, one of the areas we're working with very closely, as well as working with DERA on the Clean Air strategy, and we're also working with the Department for the Economy on the energy strategy, because obviously, depending on what happens to transport, will be a big user of energy going forward, and therefore they are building the transport needs into their energy strategy going forward as well. So there's likely to be cross-departmental discussions on how we look at transport going forward, particularly if we look at hydrogen and electric vehicles.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. And just returning again to the capital schemes, and I welcome your information as far as the Belfast hub goes. It's indicating on page 3, Chris, that the key capital schemes, and there are about 6 or 7 of them, are underway, including those 6 and 7 projects. But there doesn't appear to be any sort of funding detail attached to those, or are those is there a total outlay there in capital funding, or is there an individual breakdown?
No, when we put those in like that, we're really saying that these are projects which have a letter of offer from the department, and basically a commitment to fund them. They're the high level. We have smaller projects underneath that as well, but they would be the high levels. The way, because Translink's a public corporation and we're sort of an arm's length body, what we have to do is we have to put an economic appraisal forward for every capital project. We submit that to the department and they give us a letter of offer once they're content that that's a capital budget they're prepared to support. Okay. And so all of those would have
at least a letter of offer.
At least a letter of offer, yeah.
Okay, I suppose I do have to ask under the park and ride sites, is Troopers Lane on that?
The park and ride is proceeding on Troopers Lane, and there's work going on that, yes.
Good, thank you. Cheers.
Okay,
Glader's heading for Armagh as well.
I could also throw in the park and ride there for Newton Hours. Just in conclusion, you had a data breach a few weeks ago now. Are you in a position to discuss the impact of that and what precautionary measures you put in place, obviously, to prevent it happening again?
Yeah, so we had an IT issue a number of weeks ago. I'm not able to go into any details of what was involved in that, because obviously it's an investigation that is still underway by a number of agencies. But what I can say is that we have been able to recover from that and secure our network. We've been able to remove any viruses from our network as well, and we're in the process of slowly rebuilding business applications. All employees have access to email and all of those applications again, and we're sort of in recovery mode at the minute. How it actually occurred is a very unique instance, and certainly it has been investigated by the National Crime Agency to address how that actually took place.
Okay, thank you. I think you can get from the comments of the committee that you have the support in relation to your budgetary situation, and certainly it's something that we'll be continuing to lobby for within the House. Obviously keeping a watching brief on it, and we may ask you to return to the committee at a later date, obviously discuss the impact of the potential budget.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. If I could just add one small sentence to the last question, was that we didn't have any data loss as a result of that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, members, turning then to the next item. Unless anyone has anything further to add at this stage in relation to what we've just heard.
Well, Chair, it was around the racial profiling issue, and whether or not we should refer the matter. I mean, there are concerns. I've had concerns raised with me from settled people from within the Chinese community being asked for ID in Connolly Station, having travelled on the Enterprise. So it's just, I mean, whilst it's nothing to do with the Enterprise, the Translink itself, you know, it's difficult for people, but just wonder in terms of the Brexit subcommittee of the executive.
Well, if members are content that we leave that with clerks to explore
the
correct avenue, and certainly come back to committee next week and we can decide then where to direct our communication.
Okay, because we should have an opportunity to scrutinise what's going on in the Brexit subcommittee. I've spoken to our colleagues in the department of the committee of the executive, and they're like ourselves. I mean, it's not been given a committee home yet as such, so it seems to be all over the executive in terms of each committee. So that might be our responsibility in the committee to pursue it that way, or it's going to go into a particular committee.
Okay. Well, if you're content at this stage, then
it's not urgent, but
explore the correct path. What else? Thank you. Then
Just then returning to the presentation here, you'd asked about anything coming out of that. Is there any way we can collectively support Translink in there? I know individuals have sort of been vociferous about it, but how does we as a committee approach it? Yes?
we can do it through the budget, and obviously our remarks then in the chamber at that particular time, unless members wished for us to draft a letter to the minister at this stage.
I think that would be useful after today's presentation.
And what's the
just in relation to ensuring that Translink is adequately funded?
Which minister?
We need to send it to ours for obviously to be sent then, or our comments to be forwarded then obviously to the Minister of Finance.
Yeah, that'd be useful.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also think we have to acknowledge that there's a 600 million hole in the executive budget, so maybe to get an update. I know he mentioned, the Minister for Finance mentioned it when he was in the chamber last week, the discussions that are taking place with the British Treasury to find out if, for instance, the funding that is needed for Translink and all of the other departments are forthcoming.
I think we can appreciate
Yeah,
the
well,
fact
that's
that
right.
we are lacking a lot of information in relation to that, but I suppose we can only deal with what we have in the moment,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
in relation to the issues
Yeah.
around Translink.
Ministers are paid the big money to sort those matters out.
Mr. Boylan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would, Chair, like to, and now I know we're going to link up with the DAERA committee at some point to do a cross-committee visit or something at some
Well,
point.
they've put that on hold.
Right, okay, but because there's an interest here. I mean, as we look at some of this green energy technology and the hydrogen issue, because there's an amount of money out there that can be drew down through that office for low emissions, and I'd just maybe like to find out a wee bit more about that. But probably DAERA would know more than us, but it's certainly a cross-departmental issue. There's a funding package out there, and that's why I brought it up there at the end to try and find out how we. Because there's huge amount of money for green technologies.
Yeah, I think that's
was launched. So
we might want to discuss some of that in our strategy day. As
okay,
to
yeah,
what we
sorry,
might
no, just
want
bring
to
it up now. Yeah.
include. Okay.
Thank
Just
you.
Chair, I think it's important to make the point as well. It was clear from the deputation that they've been reliant upon monitoring rounds, and the fact that the monitoring round didn't come through recently. This is where we're in the situation. So I think it's important to outline that point, that we can't be sitting on a wing and a prayer each year waiting for a monitoring round to because the result is this if we don't get that. So I think it's important to make that point.
Of course, that's obviously the issue in relation to road maintenance and so
Yes,
on, and
yeah,
across
yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
priority areas. Okay, thank you. If we move on then to item 8, which is subordinate legislation, and it's SL1s which are not subject to Assembly proceedings. So they're not laid before the Assembly, and unless of particular interest to the committee, departmental officials do not normally attend to brief us. If members do require officials that they can come in at this stage. We are looking at page 209, which is parking places, disabled persons, vehicles, Amendment Order in Northern Ireland 2020. This rule is not subject, as I've said, to any Assembly procedure and doesn't require to be led. The rule will authorise parking places with unlimited waiting for disabled persons' vehicles in a number of towns and cities across Northern Ireland. The rule will also remove parking places with unlimited waiting in Belfast, Londonderry and Newtownards. Are members content, or would you like to hear from
Content.
Yeah, we don't need to hear from officials, so if you pass on our thanks to officials for coming, but we don't require their services today. Thank you. So we're content with the proposal of the statutory rule. Yeah. Moving then to item 9, which is SL1, the electrically assisted pedal cycles construction and use regulations, Northern Ireland 2020, and that's at page 212. At page 9 of your table papers is the regulatory impact assessment, and at page 19 is a suggested press release for the committee welcoming the updated e-bank legislation. So the Department of Infrastructure proposes to make a statutory rule setting out the construction requirements that electrically assisted pedal cycles must meet for use on the public roads in Northern Ireland without having to be registered, taxed or tested as a motor vehicle. Currently in Northern Ireland, electric assisted pedal cycles are classified as motor vehicles, specifically mopeds, and are required to be registered, licensed and insured to be used on public roads. Users must hold a valid or full driving licence and also wear a crash helmet when riding an EAPC, as they would do on a moped. However, in the rest of Great Britain, rest of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, many of these EAPCs are exempted from these requirements. Article 6.1 of the Road Traffic Order 1995 allows the Department to define a class of electrically assisted pedal cycles that is not to be considered a motor vehicle within the order. The regulation also makes provision for the testing and inspection of pedal cycles and prohibit the sale or supply of such pedal cycles unless they are equipped with brakes as specified in these regulations. The new legislation will align the requirements which apply in Northern Ireland to those in the rest of the United Kingdom and the Irish Republic. The statutory rule is subject to a affirmative resolution procedure and requires an Assembly debate. Do members have any comment in relation to this? We don't have any officials in attendance. Are members content?
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
we want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
look at this. It's long
It's
overdue,
overdue,
and it seems bizarre that this was completed in June 2016. There was one response to the consultation which was positive, and it couldn't have been brought forward before
Yeah, okay.
suspension.
Yeah.
But
No
we
problem.
are where we are.
Wales
Okay,
in
so
motion.
we welcome that.
Paddle power, Chair. Paddle
Wales in motion.
Thank you. So are members content with the press release welcoming the legislative change?
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Gosh, we're moving forward today. Our draft forward work programme, draw your attention to that, page 219. This is the proposal for the next 4 weeks. Kathy, do you want to take us through that?
Sure. Next week we're down at Belfast Sewage Treatment Works. We're having a briefing from NI Water. This is a briefing obviously of what they do, and then we're having a tour of Belfast Sewage Treatment Works. The following week we're having our strategic planning day in the building. I can't remember the room is either 29 or 30 because other committee are using this room that day, and we'll have a briefing from Research and Information Services. And we'll also have a briefing from the Northern Ireland Assembly EU Affairs Manager on what's happening with Brexit, etc., and what she can do for us basically, and then we'll do our proper strategic planning. The following week we have the salt mines, the visit down to the salt mines from Carrick, and we have to be there for 10 o'clock in the morning. And then the following week, the last week before Easter recess, we have a briefing from Sustrans, and we have a departmental briefing on the Just Park contract. That's the one to do with the app not working, etc. And then we're in the Easter recess for 2 weeks.
Okay, members content
Yep.
with regards to that. It's maybe been suggested that for the 18th of March, it is our strategy day, that we maybe start a little bit earlier, if members could be here around 9:30. Mr. Boylan?
Chair, the 17th and 18th. Yeah, is that the 18th of March? Can we start a wee bit later?
Just either start a little earlier or run on longer if we need to. It's really,
What do you
if
think?
To 9:30.
that's
9:30?
members content that we do that. Okay, thank
Right,
you.
that's fine.
Any other business?
Overruled.
Miss
God, that
Ann?
went really well for me. Thank you very much, Chair.
This may relate to the work programme, so it may get answered looking at the items here. When the previous work programme, we were to get a briefing on the River and Flood Agency.
Yes.
That's been rescheduled.
That's been rescheduled. In relation to NA Water, there was an item on the Brexit information that came through around the one-day briefs that I had concerns around. It was around the chemicals. They flagged that up, that is something that they have concerns about. For instance, if there was a crash out, and my understanding of it is in chemicals you can't store. So they only have a few weeks of chemicals in the event, for instance, at the end of this year, if there was a crash out Brexit. So that was what I was wanting under AOB to bring to your attention, and I'm wondering, is that the session to do that next week?
Well, we're meeting.
the 11th.
Yes, we're meeting with Northern Ireland Water next week,
And
they're
maybe
giving
that
us a
could
briefing,
raise-
so
that's
there's an
why I wanted
opportunity
to
to have
raise
that
that, that I could-
conversation.
Okay. And see, when you forgive me, because it's my first opportunity to go to a committee visit, do we go directly there?
Yes.
Do that? Okay, and we'll get the information on that.
Okay. Any other queries or questions members wish to ask under any other business?
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you very
Keep
much.
heading for the big chimney.
So the next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 11th
I'm sure you
of
tried to
March
insult me there, no,
in
my head.
Huh?
Northern Ireland Water,
Sorry.
Northern Ireland Water, Belfast Wastewater Treatment Works, Duncrew Street. The members are content. The committee is adjourned.
Great.
Good job.
Programme signed.